The bell in the Harrowgate clock tower had just finished striking 12, when I heard the sound that did not belong to midnight. I had walked the east gallery of the palace 10,000 times. I knew its every creak, the way the cold came through the tall windows in winter, the particular silence that settles over a great house when the fires have burned low and even the servants have gone to their beds. That silence has a grain to it. A man who has stood post for 20 years learns to read it the way a fisherman reads the sea. And on that night, somewhere below the gallery and off to the west, where the children's wing gave onto the little walled garden, the grain of the silence broke. It was not a scream. If it had been a scream, I would have been running before I finished thinking and half the guard with me. It was smaller than that. A single sharp cry, cut off almost at once, the way a child cries when he has hurt himself and is too frightened or too proud or too far from anyone to let the crying finish. Then nothing. Then, very faint, a whimper and the scrape of something small dragging itself along stone. My name is Corwin Ash, and at that hour I was the senior man of the night watch at the Palace of Harrowgate in the Kingdom of Eldermoor. I had the east wing and the gallery and the garden door under my charge, and 3 younger men posted below me, and a standing set of orders as long as my arm about what a guard of the king's household may and may not do between the striking of the tower bell and the first grey of morning. Among those orders, written plain in the watchbook that every man of us signs, was this: the guard on the gallery does not leave his post save at a relief, a fire, or a threat to the royal person, not for a sound, not for a shadow, not for anything less. I left my post. I want to be honest about that from the first, because everything that came after, all the noise and the honors and the thing the king himself said in front of the whole court, all of it rests on a man abandoning his post in the middle of the night on the strength of a sound he could not name. If I had been wrong, if it had been a cat, or a branch against a pane, or a servant fetching water, I would have been broken for it, stripped of my post, and rightly so. The book is the book. But I had heard that particular small cry before, years earlier, from a different child in a different house, and I had learned then that some sounds a man does not have the right to leave unanswered, whatever the book says. So I set my rifle in the rack, took the lantern from its hook, and went down the west stair 3 steps at a time with my heart going like a drum. The children's wing was dark. It should not have been entirely dark. There was always meant to be a lamp burning at the nursery turn, low but lit, so that if one of the little ones woke and needed the water closet, they would not go stumbling in blackness. The lamp was out. That was the first wrong thing, and I marked it even as I moved, the way you mark a footprint you'll come back to. The second wrong thing was the cold. The passage to the walled garden, the children's garden, a small square of grass and a fountain and an old pear tree, walled and safe, where the young ones played under the eyes of their nurse. That passage ended in a door that was always locked at dusk and always warm because the great kitchen chimney ran up beside it. The door stood open. The night air came through it, and on the flagstones just inside that open door, in the yellow swing of my lantern, I found the little prince. Bram, 6 years old, the youngest of the crown prince's 3 children, the small one, the one who talked to the palace cats as though they were courtiers and named every carp in the fountain and could not be got to bed without the same crooked wooden knife tucked under his arm. He was sitting against the doorframe with his knees drawn up and one small hand pressed to his other forearm, and between his fingers, dark in the lantern light, was blood. I have stood on a battlefield. I have carried men off the field with worse than a scrape, and I have learned to keep my face still when the inside of me is anything but. I knelt down slow so as not to loom over him, and I made my voice as low and even as I owned. "Your Highness," I said, "it's Corwin, it's only Corwin. Let me see." He looked up at me, and his whole small face crumpled with relief, and that undid something in my chest more than any amount of blood could have. Because he had not been crying out for help. He had cried the once when it happened, and then he had gone quiet and pressed his hand to it and sat there in the dark and the cold, 6 years old, all alone, trying to be brave the way he had seen his brother be brave, trying not to make a fuss, waiting, I think, for someone to come, and no one had come, until me. "It hurts," he said, just that. Not a wail, not a tantrum. A plain report the way a soldier gives it. It hurts. And then, because he was 6 and it was midnight and he was frightened after all, his lip went and the tears came properly and he said, "Please don't tell, please. I'm not supposed to be out of bed." I want you to understand what those words did to me, because they are the whole heart of what followed. Please don't tell. I'm not supposed to be out of bed. A child of 6, bleeding in the dark alone, and the first fear in him was not the pain and not the blood, but that he would be in trouble, that someone would be angry. That was not the fear of a child who had merely broken a rule and knew it. I had heard fear like that before in that other house from that other child, and I knew what it could mean and what it could hide, and I felt the old cold anger start up in me, but I put it away. Later. First the arm. First the boy. "Nobody's in trouble," I said, and I meant it as a fact and not a comfort, and I think he heard the difference. "Not you and not anybody. Now. I'm going to look at your arm and I'm going to be very careful, and you're going to tell me exactly what happened, top to bottom, and we'll sort it out together. Guardsman to guardsman. Can you do that?" He nodded. He liked being spoken to as a guardsman. He straightened his little back. I moved the lantern and lifted his hand away as gentle as I could. It was a graze, a long scrape running up the outside of his forearm from the wrist most of the way to the elbow, the skin torn shallow along the whole of it, welling but not deep, not the kind of thing to frighten a soldier, and exactly the kind of thing to terrify a 6-year-old alone in the dark. There was a splinter of something pale caught at the top of it near the elbow, and grit, and along the heel of his hand more scrapes, the kind you get when you fall forward and catch yourself on stone. I have dressed 100 wounds worse, but I did not let one flicker of relief show on my face, because to him this was the worst wound in the history of the world, and a man does not belittle another man's wound. I looked at it grave and careful, and I nodded slowly as though weighing it. "That's a proper wound, that," I said. "You'll have a scar off that, a soldier's scar." His eyes went wide. "But it's clean and it's shallow and it's going to mend right up. First thing we do is get it seen to. Now tell me. What happened?" And out it came, in the tumbling, half-crying way of a very tired, frightened child, and I pieced it together as he went. Fen had got out. Fen was the kitchen cat, a great gray brute with a torn ear, and Bram loved him past all reason. And that evening the cat had been shut out of the children's wing at bedtime, as the cat always was, and Bram had lain awake fretting that Fen would be cold. He had heard it, or thought he had heard it, crying at the garden door. So he had climbed out of bed, past his sleeping brother and sister, and gone down the dark passage to let his cat in from the cold. The nursery lamp was out, he said, and he could not find the flint to light his candle, so he had felt his way along the wall. He had got the garden door open. It was heavy, but the bolt was low and he could reach it, and stepped out into the cold to call the cat. And in the dark on the top step, hurrying, he had missed his footing. "There's a step," he said, "and it's broke. The corners broke off. I catched my foot and I fall down all of them." He touched his arm, his hand, and I now saw a coming bruise on his knee. "I fall down all of them and my arm went on the pointy bit, the bit that's broke." He looked at me with enormous wet eyes. "I didn't mean to. Fen wasn't even there. I don't think it was even Fen." There it was, an accident. A cat that wasn't there, a lamp that had gone out, a bolt a small boy could just reach, and a step with its stone corner broken away to a rough sharp edge, at the top of a flight in the dark at the one door that led out of the children's safe walled garden. He had fallen the whole flight and torn his arm on the broken stone, and dragged himself back inside to the doorway. And there he had sat, bleeding, alone, 6 years old at midnight, afraid above all of getting into trouble. I have said the anger started up in me and I put it away. Let me tell you now what the anger was, because it matters. It was not anger at the child, never that. It was not even yet in that moment anger at any person, for I did not yet know all I would come to know. It was the plain, cold, professional fury of a man whose one job in the world is to keep the king's household safe, kneeling in the dark over a bleeding 6-year-old prince, doing the sums. A broken step no one had mended. A garden door a small child could unbolt alone. A nursery lamp that should have burned all night, gone dark. A nurse who should have been within call, nowhere. Any one of them was a lapse. All of them together on the same night at the same door were not an accident of the ordinary kind. Accidents like that do not simply happen in a well-run house. Somewhere in the running of this house, something had gone wrong or been let go wrong, or the thought was there and I did not yet let myself look straight at it, been made asterisk to go wrong, and a child had bled for it. But that was for later. That was for the cold light of morning and the questions I would ask and the answers I would drag into the open. In that moment, on those flagstones, there was only the boy and his arm and the fear in his face, and one decision in front of me, and the whole of the rest of it turned on which way I chose. The book said, raise the alarm. A wrong to the royal person, even a scrape, is a matter for the whole watch. Rouse the house. Summon the nurse, the steward, the queen consort's people who oversaw the running of the children's wing, the physician, the guard. That was correct. That was the order. Every man of my training would tell you the same. You do not, as a single guardsman, take a hurt prince into your own hands in the dark and deal with it yourself. You raise the alarm and you hand him up the chain, and you stand your post. But I looked at that child, please don't tell. I'm not supposed to be out of bed, and I thought about what raising the alarm would mean for him. A dark passage suddenly full of loud grown people. Lanterns and voices and someone likely being sharp with him for being out of his bed, someone else being sharp with the nurse, the whole machinery of the house grinding awake around one small, frightened boy who already believed that the worst thing about his own bleeding arm was that he'd be in trouble for it. He had waited alone in the dark for someone to come, and the person who came was me. And if the first thing I did was make his fear come true, make it loud, make it a matter of blame, then I would have failed him more surely than the broken step had. So I broke the rule. I made my next decision, and I will stand by it to the last day I draw breath. I did not raise the alarm. I picked up the little Prince of Eldermoor in my 2 arms, careful of the hurt one, and I said, right. You and I are going to the guardroom where there's a good fire and a proper kit, and I'm going to clean this up and bind it neat, soldier's fashion, and you're going to be warm. And then, once you're seen to and warm and not one moment before, we'll decide together what wants doing about the rest. Nobody's going to shout. Nobody's in trouble. That's a guardsman's word. And he put his good arm around my neck and his face against my shoulder, and I felt him let go of the whole terrible weight of being brave alone, and I carried him up out of the dark. I did not know, carrying him, that within 3 days that broken step would bring a scheme down in ruins, that it would put a name to a shadow that had been moving through the children's wing for a season, and that the king himself would rise from his chair in front of the assembled court to say a thing to a common guardsman that no one present would ever forget. I only knew the child in my arms had stopped shaking. That was enough to be going on with. That was, in the moment, everything. The guardroom of the East Wing is a low, stone-vaulted chamber with a great hearth that we never let go out, winter or summer, because it is the one warm, dry place a man can dry his cloak and thaw his hands on a night watch. There is a long scrubbed table, a rack of arms, a shelf of the watchbooks going back 40 years, and because guardsmen break skin and bruise bone as a matter of course, a proper campaign medical chest, kept stocked and clean, that I had charge of. When I came in through the door with the prince in my arms, young Denny Rourke, the newest of my 3, shot up off the bench so fast he knocked it over. Sir, is that? Bar the door, close your mouth, and put the kettle over the fire, I said low, and light every lamp. The prince has taken a fall and hurt his arm, and we're going to see to it. No shouting, no running for anyone, no leaving this room. That's an order. Do you have it? Denny had it. He was young, but he was not a fool, and something in my face told him this was not a night for questions. He barred the door and lit the lamps and swung the kettle over the flame while I set Bram down on the long table, close by the fire, and wrapped my own cloak around his shoulders. The other 2 men of my watch were away at the far posts and would not be back before the 2 o'clock turn, for now it was the 3 of us, and the boy, and the fire, and I was glad of the quiet. I opened the medical chest and laid out what I needed the way I'd have laid it out on campaign: clean water warming, clean linen, the little brown bottle of spirit wash we used on cuts, salve, bandage, a pair of fine tweezers for the grit and the splinter. And I did it all slow and unhurried and out loud, narrating each thing to the boy as I went, because a frightened child fears most what he cannot see coming. First we wash our hands, you and me both, because a clean wound heals and a dirty one festers, and no soldier of mine goes about with a festering arm. Now, this water's warm, feel it, and I'm going to bathe the scrape to see it clear. It'll sting a little where the spirit goes on, and I'll tell you before it does, and you may squeeze Denny's hand as hard as you like when it comes. Isn't that right, Denny? Hard as you like, Your Highness, said Denny, and gave the boy his hand, and Bram took it with great seriousness. I bathed the arm. He was very brave. When I came to the top of the scrape near the elbow and took the splinter out with the tweezers, it was a sliver of pale stone, I noted, the same pale limestone as the palace steps, and I set it aside on a square of linen rather than throwing it in the fire, though I could not have told you yet exactly why. He gave a single sharp hiss and squeezed Denny's hand white, and did not cry. When the spirit wash went on and it stung, I had told him it would, and he shut his eyes and set his jaw and bore it, and when it was done he opened his eyes and looked at me and said, "Was that brave?" And I said, "That was as brave as any man I've stood beside," and it was no more than the truth. I dressed the wound. Salve, then a clean pad of linen laid along the whole length of the scrape, then the bandage wound firm and neat from wrist to elbow, tied off soldier's fashion with the knot on the outside where it wouldn't press. I bound the heel of his hand too, and put a smaller dressing on the grazed knee. When I was done, his whole forearm was a clean white wrapping, and he turned it this way and that in the firelight, admiring it, the pain half forgotten in the glory of a real bandage. Denny fetched down a mug and made him warm milk with a spoon of honey in it, and Bram sat on the table wrapped in my cloak with his bandaged arm and his mug of milk and his color coming back. And for the first time since I'd found him, he looked like a small boy who was going to be all right, and not like a small frightened thing alone in the dark. And it was then, warm and safe and not in trouble, that he began to talk, not because I pressed him. I had done with questions for the night, I thought. He talked the way a child does when the fear has drained out and left him needing to fill the space where it had been. And what he said, mug in hand, kicking his heels gently against the table leg, went into me like a slow, cold blade. "I was glad it was you, Corwin," he said, "because you won't be cross like Nurse Halloway." I kept my hands busy tidying the chest. Why would Nurse Halloway be cross? She's always cross now. He drank his milk. Not before. Before it was Nurse Petra and she wasn't ever cross, she used to sing. But Nurse Petra went away and now it's Nurse Halloway and she locks the door. Which door does she lock, Highness? The passage door, our door. So we can't get out at night. He said it as a matter of course, the way children report the strange rules of the grown-up world without questioning them. She locks it from the outside so we stay in. Only tonight she forgot the little one, the garden bolt, or she didn't do it so I could get out that way. She locks the big door, but she forgot the garden one. He frowned. The lamp went out too. Nurse Petra never let the lamp go out. Nurse Halloway lets it go out. She says it wastes oil. I want to set down plainly what I was hearing, because I have turned it over 1,000 times since, and it always comes out the same. A nurse, a new one, put in charge of the Crown Prince's 3 children within the last season, replacing one the children had loved, who locked the children into their wing at night from the outside, who let the night lamp go dark against all custom and all good sense, in a wing full of small children who might wake and need to move about in the dark, who was, by the child's own account, always cross, always sharp, so that a hurt 6-year-old's first instinct was to hide his hurt rather than call to her. And a garden door, the one exit from the locked wing, standing with its low bolt undrawn on the very night the child slipped out, at the head of a flight of steps whose top stone had been left broken to a sharp edge. I am a guardsman, not a magistrate. I do not leap to accuse. There are honest explanations for each single thing. A nurse might lock a door out of an overcautious fear of sleepwalkers, wrong-headed but meaning well. A lamp might gutter out by ill luck. A step might crack and no one notice for a week. But I had spent 20 years learning to tell the shape of a thing from its parts, and the shape of these parts, laid side by side, was not the shape of ill luck. It was the shape of neglect at best. And neglect, when it gathers around a particular child in a particular wing after a particular change of staff, is a thing a careful man does not simply write in a book and forget. "Bram," I said, and I sat down on the bench so my eyes were level with his. "When did Nurse Petra go away?" He thought, counting on his fingers the way children do. "After the leaves came down, when it got cold. 2 months then, or near it, autumn." "And do you know why she went?" His face clouded. "She cried. She didn't want to go. She hugged us all and she cried and she said," he stopped. "She said a lady sent her away. She said the lady told lies about her so she had to go and it wasn't true." His lip trembled at the memory. "I don't know which lady. Malin knows. Malin said don't tell." Malin, the eldest of the 3, 9 years old, sharp as a tack, and by every account the watchful one, the one who minded her small brother and sister like a little sergeant. If Malin knew a thing and had told her brother to keep it quiet, then Malin had seen something and understood in her 9-year-old way that it was dangerous to say. Children do not make up that kind of caution out of nothing. "I won't ask you to tell anything Malin said to keep," I told him, and his relief was plain. "You've told me plenty and you've done right. Now finish your milk." Behind me low Denny said, "Sir," just that. He'd heard it all. He was young, but he'd heard it, and when I turned he had gone pale under his freckles. "Sir, that's the new nurse. That's Her Majesty the Queen Consort's own appointment. Everyone below stairs knows it. Nurse Petra was turned out on a word from the Queen Consort's household and Nurse Halloway put in her place, and nobody dared say a thing because it was the Queen Consort's doing," I finished for him. "Yes, I know how the house talks." I did know. Every man and woman in service at Harrowgate knew the shape of the court by then, the way you know the weather without looking out the window. King Alaric grew old and saw less than he once had. His second wife, the Queen Consort Morwenna, saw everything and moved everything quietly, patiently, with a cold and grasping care, and had done so since the death of the king's beloved first wife, the late Queen Isolde, whose son the Crown Prince Rowan stood between Morwenna's ambitions and everything she wanted for her own, for her grown son Lord Cassius and her daughter Lady Verena. The Crown Prince's 3 children, Malin, Torin, and little Bram, were Isolde's grandchildren, Rowan's heirs, and they stood, small and unknowing, squarely in the Queen Consort's path. I had never let myself think too hard about what that might mean. It was not a guardsman's place to think it. But I was thinking it now, with Isolde's youngest grandchild sitting bandaged on my table because a door was locked and a lamp was dark and a step was broken, in a wing run by the Queen Consort's own hand-picked nurse. I put the sliver of pale stone, wrapped in its square of linen, into the breast of my tunic, and I made my second decision of the night, which was quieter than the first and in the end weighed even more. I would not raise a general alarm. I would not go, this hour, hammering on the steward's door with a story about the Queen Consort that I could not yet prove, and that would be my word, a common guardsman's word, against the second most powerful person in the kingdom. That was the road to being called a hysteric, a troublemaker, a man who abandoned his post and then slandered the king's wife to cover it. That road ended with me broken and the wing unchanged and the children no safer. No. I would do it the guardsman's way, quietly, carefully, in order. I would see the child safe back to a properly guarded, properly lit bed this very night. And in the morning I would go, not to the queen consort's people who ran the wing, but straight up the true chain of the king's household to the warden of the guard, and past him if I must, to the one man in the palace with both the right and the will to act, the children's own father, the Crown Prince Rowan. I would carry it to Rowan with the child's own words and the broken step and the sliver of stone, and I would let the father decide. But first the boy. I took him back down the passage with a lantern held high, and this time I looked at everything. The nursery lamp, cold and dry, and when I lifted its little glass and looked, the wick had been trimmed down almost to nothing, so short it could never have held a flame more than an hour, not gone out by chance but set to fail. The passage door at the wing's mouth, and there in the lock on the outside the great iron key, left turned. Someone had locked the children in and tonight been careless with the garden bolt. And the steps to the garden when I brought the lantern down to them. The top stone with its whole outer corner sheared clean away, the break not weathered and gray but pale and fresh, the raw stone still sharp. A new break, days old at most, that anyone whose duty was those steps must have seen and should have roped off or mended, and had not. I mended what I could that hour. I drew the great key from the passage lock and put it in my pocket. No child of that house would be locked in behind me while I drew breath. I reset the nursery lamp with a full wick from the guardroom and lit it so it burned proper and bright. I bolted the garden door top and bottom and hung my own lantern by it. And I carried Bram to his bed and tucked him in beside the crooked wooden knight, and sat by him with my hand on the coverlet until his breathing went long and slow, and he was truly asleep, safe, warm, and watched. His sister Malin stirred in the next bed as I rose to go, and opened her eyes, and looked at me a long steady moment in the new lamplight, and looked at her sleeping brother's bandaged arm and then at me again, and she did not cry out, and she did not ask. She only nodded once, the way one soldier nods to another who has come to relieve the watch. And I understood that Malin had been standing a watch of her own over that wing alone for 2 months, and that tonight, for the first time, she was not standing it by herself. I nodded back. Then I took up my post outside their door, and I stood it until the gray of morning, and no book in the world could have moved me from it. Morning at Harrowgate begins in the guardroom before it begins anywhere else. The relief came at the gray hour, and I signed the watch book, and under the plain column where a man notes anything out of the ordinary I wrote only this: Prince Bram, accidental fall on garden steps, minor injury dressed, child safe abed. Broken step, dark lamp, locked wing reported to warden this day. I signed it Corwin Ash. I did not hide what I had done. A man who breaks a rule and then hides it has done 2 wrong things. A man who breaks a rule and writes it down plain has done one and stands ready to answer for it. Let them see I left my post. Let them see why. Then I went to find the warden. Warden Galtrey was an old soldier of the old school, gray and square and slow to warmth, who had held the discipline of the King's Guard for longer than I had served under it. He did not love me. I was too much given in his view to thinking, and a guard who thinks is a guard who might one night decide the book was wrong, but he was fair, and he was honest, and he had no love at all for the queen consort's meddling in the household, which she had lately begun to reach even into the running of the guard. I found him in his little stone office off the barrack yard, and I laid it before him plain and in order, the sound in the night, my leaving the post, the child, the fall, the arm, and then carefully the pattern, the locked wing, the ruined lamp, the fresh broken step, the dismissed nurse the children loved, and the sharp new one the queen consort had put in her place. I set the sliver of pale stone on his desk. I did not say the word scheme. I did not need to. I laid the parts side by side and let him see the shape of them, the way I had. He listened without a word, his face like the stone wall behind him. When I was done he was silent a long while. Then he said, "You left your post." "I did, sir." On a sound I knew, sir, a child's cry cut off. I've heard it before and I'll not apologize for knowing it. I stood straight. If the sound had been nothing, I'd have stood to be broken for it and said no word in my own defense. But the sound was the youngest prince of Eldermoor, bleeding alone in the dark at midnight, sir, in a wing that was locked from the outside with the lamp put out. I'd leave my post again this hour to answer that, and every hour after, book or no book. Galtrey looked at me a long time. Then he picked up the sliver of pale stone off his desk and turned it in his thick old fingers, and something moved behind his eyes, and I understood that the pattern had reached him too, that the old soldier had done the same cold some I had. "The step," he said. "You say the break is fresh." "Days old at most, sir." "Pale, sharp, no weather on it, and unmended and unroped at the head of a flight, at the one door a locked-in child could reach. And the lamp wick cut short." "Cut, sir, not burned, trimmed down so it could not last the night." He set the stone down. "You know what you are laying at the door of this house." "I lay nothing at any door, sir. I report a broken step and a dark lamp and a locked wing and a hurt child, and I ask that they be looked into by someone with the authority to look, before another night passes and another child finds that step in the dark. Where the looking leads is not for me to say. But I'll not sign my name to a watchbook that calls it a simple accident, sir, because I don't believe that it was, and I'll not have it said that a guard of Harrowgate saw all this and called it nothing. That, I think, was what turned him. Not the accusation I did not make, but the accusation I refused to not make, the plain refusal to let it be written down as nothing. Galtrey was a man who had spent 50 years watching the powerful arrange for inconvenient truths to be written down as nothing. He rose. "You'll take this to no one else," he said. "Not the steward, who is the queen consort's man, not the physician, who talks. You and I will take it this morning to the one man it belongs to." He reached for his cloak, the children's father. "If the crown prince chooses to make it a matter of the house, that is his right and his blood. If he chooses to bury it, then it's buried, and you and I have done our duty and no more can be asked of us. But he will hear it first from us, before the queen consort's people can dress it up as a careless boy who fell out of bed." He fixed me with his hard old eye. "You understand what you're beginning, Ash. Once the crown prince knows, there is no writing it down as nothing ever again. It becomes a thing between him and his father's wife. And you will be the man who began it." "I understand, sir." "Then come." We found the Crown Prince Rowan at that early hour where he was most mornings, in the long gallery above the tilt-yard, watching his eldest son Torrin at sword drill with the master-at-arms below. Rowan was a tall, grave man in his prime, dark like his mother, the late Queen Isolde, with her same steady eyes, and he carried the particular watchfulness of a man who knows himself and his children to be surrounded by a court that would not weep to see them fall. He turned when we came in, and his eyes went at once to the warden's face, and then to mine, and he read something there, because his own face went still and careful. "Warden," he said, "an Ash isn't at the East Gallery." He knew his guardsman by name. "It was one of the reasons we would have died for him. What's happened? Is it the children?" "It's the youngest, your highness," I said before Galtrey could soften it. "A father should hear it from the man who was there. Prince Bram had a fall last night and hurt his arm. He is safe now. I dressed it myself, and he slept the night through, guarded, and the hurt is a scrape no more that will mend clean. I would not have you hear the word *hurt and fear worse. He is well and asleep, and asking after his cat this morning, I don't doubt." The fear that had leapt into Rowan's face at the word *fall eased, but did not go, because he was not a fool and he had caught the rest of it, the warden's grim presence, my careful words, the fact that a fall in the night had brought 2 guardsmen to him at dawn instead of a single line in a nurse's report. "A scrape," he said slowly. "That brings the warden of my father's guard to me before breakfast." "No, your highness," said Galtrey, "the scrape does not. What brings us is how he came by it." And he looked at me and gave me the floor, which from Galtrey was a thing near to unheard of. So I told the Crown Prince Rowan everything, as I had told the warden, in order, holding nothing back and coloring nothing. The sound, the dark passage, the child in the doorway, the garden door a small boy could unbolt, the broken step at the head of the flight, its break days fresh and unmended, the nursery lamp with its wick cut short so it could not burn the night, the great key left turned in the passage lock, the children shut in from the outside. And then, because he had to know it to understand the rest, what the boy himself had said, warm and safe by the fire, that nurse Petra, whom the children loved, who never let the lamp die, had been sent away weeping in the autumn on a word from a lady, and that nurse Halloway, always cross, who locked the door and let the lamp die and said it wasted oil, had been put in her place. I did not say the queen consort's name. I did not have to. Rowan's face, as I spoke, went from a father's fear to something far colder and far more terrible. The still, white, absolute stillness of a man watching a suspicion he had carried in silence for 2 months rise up in front of him at last with a bleeding child's arm for its proof. When I had finished, he was quiet a long moment. Below in the yard, the ring of Torrens' practice blade went on, bright and ignorant. At last Rowan said, very low, "Show me the step." "Your Highness," Galtree began. "Show me the step, Warden." He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. I have watched things happen to my children this season that I told myself I was imagining. A fever no one could name. A pony that shied for the first time in its life on the one morning my daughter rode it. A missing letter. Small things. Each one alone, a thing a careful man tells himself is chance, because to think otherwise is to think a thought about my father's wife that a son may not think and stay sane. I have written them down as nothing. He turned his steady eyes on me, and I saw in them his mother's iron. And now a guardsman I have never given cause to lie to me stands here, and tells me my youngest son bled alone in a locked wing in the dark on a step that someone left broken. I will not write this one down as nothing. Show me the step, and then send for Nurse Halloway, and let no one warn her first. We went down to the children's wing in the pale morning, the 3 of us, and I showed the Crown Prince the step. He knelt and put his own hand to the fresh-sheared corner, the way his son must have caught it in the dark, and I watched a father's imagination do its cruel work on his face. He looked at the low garden bolt a child could reach. He climbed the passage and looked at the great outside lock, and I gave him the key I had drawn from it in the night, and his hand closed on the iron so hard the knuckles whitened. He looked into the nursery lamp at the cut-short wick, and with each thing he grew not louder but quieter, and colder, and more still, until by the end he had the terrible composure of a man who has stopped hoping he is wrong. Bram was awake, and had his cat Fen had turned up at the kitchen door at dawn as cats do, entirely unharmed and unbothered, the great gray author of the whole night's grief. And when his father came into the nursery, the boy held up his bandaged arm with enormous pride and said, "Look, Papa, I've got a soldier's scar. Corwin did it. It's going to leave a mark." And Rowan, who a moment before had looked like winter itself, went down on one knee by his son's bed and gathered the boy in with a care that told the whole story of his fear and said, "So I see. A soldier's scar, and a soldier who bore it bravely, I don't doubt." And over the boy's head his eyes found mine, and there passed between us a thing that no words were needed for, and that I have carried ever since. Then he sent for the nurse. Nurse Halloway came without alarm, for no one had warned her, a spare, upright woman of middle years with a sharp closed face and quick eyes that went at once, when she entered the nursery and found not only the children but the Crown Prince and the warden of the guard and a grim East Gallery guardsman waiting, to the bandage on Bram's arm, and then, quick and calculating, to the door behind her. I marked that look. An innocent nurse, finding her charge hurt and her master's grave face upon her, looks first to the child. This one looked first to the exit. The Crown Prince questioned her himself quietly, and it was a fearful thing to watch, for he did not accuse and he did not threaten. He only asked her in his level voice to account. Why was the passage door locked from the outside at night? For the children's safety, she said, so they should not wander. And if there were a fire, she had not thought of a fire. Why was the night lamp dark when custom and safety both required it burn till dawn? Oil was dear, she said, and the household budget close, and she had been told. Here she stopped, one word too late. Told, said Rowan, very soft. By whom? To economize, she said. In a general way, by the household. The household, Rowan repeated. Which reports in the matter of my children's wing to whom? She did not answer, her jaw set. And I saw then that she was not the author of this thing but its instrument, a hard woman, careless enough or cowed enough or paid enough to do as she was bid and ask no questions, to lock the door and starve the lamp because someone above her wished the children's wing to be a place where accidents might more easily happen, and to say nothing. She would not name the someone. She was more afraid of the someone than she was of the crown prince, and that fact told Rowan more than any confession could have. And the step, Rowan said, the broken step at the head of the garden flight, you walk that passage 20 times a day. When did it break, and why was it neither mended nor roped nor reported? Here she made her one mistake, the mistake of the guilty who have prepared for the wrong question. I never saw it broken, she said, too quickly. If it broke in the night. It was whole yesterday. And little Malin, 9 years old, who had been sitting very still on her own bed watching the grown people with her mother's grandmother's steady eyes, said clearly into the silence, That's not true. It's been broken 3 days. I saw Nurse Halloway see it. She stood on it and it wobbled and she looked at it and she didn't tell anyone. I saw. The room went utterly still. Nurse Halloway's face drained white. Rowan turned slowly to look at his daughter, and Malin looked back at him, small and pale and absolutely certain. A child who had been keeping watch for 2 months and had decided in that moment that the watch was over and the time to speak had come. You saw, said Rowan gently. I see lots of things, said Malin. Nobody asks me because I'm 9, but I saw her see the step, and I saw the lady give her the letter. What lady, Malin? Malin's chin trembled just once and then steadied, and she said the thing she had told her little brother to keep secret, the thing she had been too frightened to say to anyone until her brother lay bandaged and her father knelt asking. The lady who sent Nurse Petra away. She came to the wing when she thought we were sleeping, and she gave Nurse Halloway a letter and money. I saw the money, and she said, Malin swallowed. She said, just let it happen, Halloway. You don't have to do anything. Only stop being careful. Nature will manage the rest. The child looked at her father with enormous eyes. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was bad, so I started keeping watch. I locked the garden bolt myself every night from the inside so Bram couldn't get out even if the lamp was dark. Every night. Only last night I fell asleep before I did it. And Bram. And here the little sergeant who had held the line alone for 2 months finally broke, and put her hands over her face, and wept, because in her 9-year-old heart she believed that her brother's bleeding arm was her own fault for falling asleep at her post. I have stood, as I said, on battlefields. I have never in my life seen anything harder to bear than that child weeping, because she thought she had failed her watch. Rowan crossed to her and took her in his arms, and Bram, bewildered, crept over to lean against them both. And the crown prince held his 2 children, Isolde's grandchildren, the heirs of Eldermoor, and looked over their heads at me, and the warden with a face I hope never to see again on any man, and said, in a voice like the closing of a great iron door, Warden Galtrey, have Nurse Halloway held, comfortably, decently guarded. She is a witness now, and I want her whole and willing to speak when the time comes, not frightened into silence. And Ash, his eyes came to me. You will say nothing of this to anyone, and you will keep your post at that door, and you will let no one, no servant, no steward, no member of any household but my own, near these children until I have seen my father. Do you understand me? The moment the queen consort learns her instrument is taken, she will move to cover it, and the first thing she will reach for is the story that this was a common accident and a careless boy. We must reach the king with the truth before she reaches him with the lie. And there, for a few hours, it looked as though we had won. That is the false dawn, and I have learned since to distrust false dawns above all things. It looked, That bright cold morning, as though the thing was as good as done. We had the child safe. We had the nurse held and the pattern plain, and a 9-year-old witness who had seen the letter and the money passed and heard the words spoken. Just let it happen. Only stop being careful. Nature will manage the rest. We had the warden of the guard convinced, and the crown prince himself risen in cold fury to carry it to the king. What could stand against that? The truth was ours. It only wanted telling. But I had forgotten, or rather, I had never truly reckoned with, because I was a guardsman and not a courtier. The one thing the queen consort Morwenna had that we did not, which was not a witness and not a proof, but a mastery, long practiced and merciless, of the getting to the king first. And while we readied ourselves to go to King Alaric with the truth, she was already, by means I would only understand later, going to him with a story of her own. For the queen consort had her own eyes in the household, and one of them had seen the warden come to the tilt-yard at dawn and leave with the crown prince toward the children's wing, and had carried that small strange fact to her before we had so much as sent for the nurse. And Morwenna, who had spent 20 years turning inconvenient truths into nothing, did not wait to learn what we had. She acted at once on the mere shape of it. By the time the crown prince Rowan sought his father's presence that morning, the queen consort had already been closeted with the aging king for the better part of an hour, and had already, gently, sorrowfully, wept a little as she told him the terrible thing she had just learned. That a guardsman of the East Gallery had abandoned his post in the night, been found in the children's wing, taken the youngest prince from his bed into a barrack-room full of soldiers, and that the poor child had somehow been hurt, and that the guardsman, a known malcontent, a man who thought too much she had heard, was now spreading a wild and wicked slander through the palace to cover his own gross dereliction, blaming the household, blaming the nurse, blaming, if you could credit it, the queen consort herself. And she asked the king, her voice trembling with a mother's grief, to have the dangerous man arrested before he could do the children further harm. I learned all this only after, of course. What I knew at the time was simpler and colder. That at mid-morning, while I stood my post at the nursery door with the 2 children playing quiet at my feet, and Bram showing his cat the bandage, a captain of the palace guard I did not well know came down the passage with 4 men behind him, and told me I was under arrest by the king's own order for desertion of my post and for slander against the crown, and that I was to surrender my sidearm and come with him. I will tell you what went through me in that moment, because it was not fear and it was not even surprise. It was a kind of grim recognition, the settling of a thing I had half expected since the night before. Of course she had reached the king first. Of course the truth, walking, was slower than the lie riding post. I had known, kneeling on those flagstones at midnight, that if I broke the rule and was wrong I would be broken for it, and now here it was, except that I had not been wrong, and I was to be broken all the same, not for the breaking of the rule but for the truth I had found by breaking it. The queen consort did not need me to be wrong. She only needed me arrested, discredited, hurried out of the way, so that the story of the careless boy and the deserting guardsman could set like plaster before the crown prince could pour the truth into it. I did not resist. A guardsman who resists the king's own captain is exactly the wild, dangerous man the lie had painted. I would not hand her that. I unbuckled my sidearm and gave it over. But I said, loud and level, so that the children heard and would remember, so that Denny Rourke coming up the passage heard, so that every ear in that wing heard. I go under arrest, Captain, and I'll not lift a hand against you. But mark my words and mark the hour. I left my post last night to answer a child's cry, and I found the youngest prince of Eldermoor bleeding alone in a locked wing on a step that was left broken for him to find in the dark. I have said no word of slander. I have reported a broken step and a dark lamp and a locked door and a hurt child to my warden and to the children's own father in that order as the book requires. If that is treason, then the book is treason, and I'll answer for it to the king's own face. And I ask only this, that I be brought before the king in the open court and not made to disappear quiet in some cell. Let the king hear what I found. Let him hear it from me. I'll stand by every word." And little Malin, 9 years old, who had kept the watch alone for 2 months and had wept an hour before believing she'd failed it, stood up very straight beside her brother and said to the captain in her clear child's voice, "He's telling the truth. He saved Bram. If you take him, you have to take me too, because I saw everything, and I'll tell the king, and you can't stop a princess from talking to her own grandpapa." The captain, to his credit, was a decent man caught in an ugly errand, and he did not know what to do with a 9-year-old princess offering herself for arrest, and his hesitation bought the minute that saved everything, because in that minute the Crown Prince Rowan came down the passage. He had gone to seek his father and been turned away. The king was closeted with the queen consort and would see no one, not even his own heir, and Rowan, no fool, had understood at once what that meant, and had come at a near run to the one place the blow would fall first, the nursery. He arrived to find a captain, and 4 men taking his children's protector under arrest at the very door of the children's wing, and he stopped in the passage, and he drew himself up, and the whole of the late Queen Isolde's line was in his face. "Captain," said Rowan, "you will release this man." "Your Highness, I have the king's own order." "You have the queen consort's order dressed in the king's voice," said Rowan, "and I know the difference, and so will my father before this hour is out. This man is under my protection, and so are these children. You will not take him from this door. If you have a quarrel with that, you may take it to the king, where I am going now, and where I will be heard, closeted consort or no, because I am the Crown Prince of Eldermoor and the father of the hurt child, and there is no power in this palace that will keep me from my own father's presence one moment longer." He turned to me. "Ash, you asked to be brought before the king in open court. You shall be, not as a prisoner, as a witness. Bring the step if you can bring it, bring the stone, bring the wick, bring the key, bring everything. And bring my daughter, for she has more courage than half my court, and she has earned the right to be heard. We go to the king, now, all of us. And we do not stop, and we do not wait, and we do not knock. I have served the Crown of Eldermoor for 20 years, and I have never been prouder to stand in its livery than I was in the next quarter hour, walking the great cold corridors of Harrowgate behind the Crown Prince Rowan. He with his hurt son in his arms and his fierce daughter at his side, the warden Galtree grim beside me, the captain and his 4 men fallen in behind not as jailers now, but as an honor guard that no longer quite knew whose order it was following. And myself carrying the sliver of pale stone and the cut wick and the great iron key, the small mute witnesses of a midnight, up to the presence of the king. They tried to stop us at the doors of the king's morning room. The queen consort's people were there, smooth, sorrowful, full of his majesty is not to be disturbed, and this is most irregular asterisk, and your highness, in your distress, surely you would not. Rowan went through them like a tide through reeds. He did not shout, he did not draw. He simply did not stop, and his rank and his blood and the child in his arms were a force no reed of a courtier could stand against, and the great doors gave, and we came into the presence of King Alaric of Eldermoor, and of his consort, the Queen Morwenna, who stood at the king's side with a lace handkerchief pressed to her eyes, and who, at the sight of us, at the sight of the crown prince and the bandaged child and the 9-year-old princess, and the grim warden and the guardsmen she had ordered arrested, all walking free into the king's own room, went, for one single unguarded instant, absolutely white. I saw it, the warden saw it, and I think, though he was old and his eyes were failing, the king saw it too. King Alaric was aged and slow, and had leaned these many years on the wife who now stood weeping so prettily at his side, and he had, that very morning, half agreed to have me arrested on her word. But he was not, whatever else the years had made him, a wicked man nor a stupid one, and he loved his son and he loved his son's children, and when his youngest grandchild held up a bandaged arm across the room and called out, in a small glad voice that did not know it was in the middle of a war, "Grandpapa, look, I've got a soldier's scar," Something in the old king's face came awake that had been asleep a long time. "Rowan," said the king, "what is the meaning of this?" "I gave an order this morning." "You gave an order, father," said Rowan, and his voice was gentle for all its steel, because he was speaking to his father and not only to his king, on the word of one person who told you one story before any other soul could tell you another. "I ask you only this. You are the king. You have judged 1,000 causes. Did you ever in a long and honorable reign hang a man on one side's tail before you heard the other?" "No," said the king slowly. "No, I did not." "Then hear the other," said Rowan. "Hear it from the man himself, whom your order would have carried away before he could speak. Hear it from your own granddaughter, who saw what a 9-year-old should never have had to see, and kept silent out of fear until her brother bled. And then, father, then judge. That is all I ask, not that you believe me, that you hear us both sides as a king does before you decide. Will you do that much?" And the king looked at his son and at his grandchildren, and for a long, long moment at his weeping wife, whose weeping had gone, if you watched closely, very still. And King Alaric of Eldermoor straightened in his great chair, and something of the ruler he had been came back into him, and he said, "I will hear it. Guardsmen, come forward, and speak the truth on your oath before your king. What did you find last night?" So I came forward, and I stood before the king of Eldermoor, and I told it. I did not embellish it, and I did not soften it, and I did not, even now, say the queen consort's name, for it was not my place to accuse her, only to lay the truth down plain and let it accuse whom it would. I told him of the sound in the night, and my leaving my post, and I owned that plainly first of all, that the king might weigh my honesty in the small thing before he trusted it in the great one. I told him of the child in the doorway, alone, bleeding, and I confess my voice was not entirely steady here, of the first words out of that child's mouth, "Please don't tell, I'm not supposed to be out of bed." I saw the king flinch at that. A grandfather knows what it means when a hurt child's first fear is of getting into trouble. And then I laid the small witnesses on the table before the king, one by one, and named each. The sliver of pale limestone from the fresh broken step that I had drawn from the child's own arm. The night lamp wick, cut short so it could not burn till dawn. The great iron key that had locked the children into their wing from the outside. And I told him the pattern that these small things made when laid side by side, the loved nurse dismissed, the sharp nurse installed, the door locked, the lamp starved, the step left broken, all gathered in a single season around a single wing full of a single set of children. I did not say what the pattern meant. I said only, "These are the things I found, Majesty. I am a guardsman, not a judge. I make no charge." But I could not, in my honor, sign these into the book as a simple accident, because a simple accident is not what my 20 years tell me they are. I leave the judging to you. That is why I asked to stand before you, not to be spared, to be heard. Then Rowan gently brought Malin forward, and the king's granddaughter told her grandfather in her clear, brave child's voice what she had seen, the step that wobbled and was not reported, the lady who came in the night and gave the nurse a letter and money, and said just let it happen, only stop being careful, nature will manage the rest. And how she, Malin, had bolted the garden door herself every night for 2 months so her brother could not get out, and had fallen asleep just the once last night, and blamed herself. And when she had done, the room was so silent I could hear the fire. The king turned to his consort. "Morwenna," he said, and his old voice was terrible in its quietness. "My granddaughter says a lady came in the night to the children's wing and gave the nurse money and told her to stop being careful. My granddaughter is 9 years old and does not know how to invent such a thing, nor why she would." He paused. "Look at me and tell me it was not you." And the queen consort, who had wept so prettily an hour before, who had so nearly had me carried away in irons, who had spent 20 patient years turning inconvenient truths into nothing, opened her mouth to spin one more story, and found, for the first time in all those years, that she could not. Because the king was looking at her the way he had not looked at her in a decade, awake, and his son was looking at her, and his grandchildren were looking at her, and a grim old warden was looking at her, and a common guardsman she had failed to make disappear was looking at her, and every one of them had heard the child, and the lie would not come. Her face worked. And then, seeing the story would not hold, seeing it in the king's awakened eyes, she made the only move left to a proud creature at bay, which was to abandon the pose of grief, and let the cold true thing beneath it show. "They are not your blood, Alaric," she said, low and vicious. "Not mine, Isolde's brats standing between my son and everything that is his by right. I did nothing, I touched no child. If a step broke and a lamp went dark, is that a crime? I only decline to be careful on their behalf. The world is a dangerous place for careless children. I merely did not intervene." And in trying to defend herself, she had confessed. Every soul in the room heard it. I merely did not intervene. She had arranged for the children's wing to become a place where an accident might happen, and then stood back and waited for the dangerous world to do her work, and called her own hands clean because they had held no knife. The king heard it. The crown prince heard it. And King Alaric of Eldermoor, aged and slow and long deceived, rose from his great chair. And this is the moment the whole palace speaks of still, the moment that, when the court had assembled that afternoon to hear the king's judgment, he made again in front of them all. He rose and he came down from his chair, past his stricken wife without a look, and he crossed the room to where I stood, a common guardsman of the East Gallery, and he stopped before me. And the King of Eldermoor inclined his head, the king, to me, and he said, so that every ear in the room, and later, every ear in the assembled court would hear it. "You broke your post, and in doing it you kept a far greater one. There is not a lord in my kingdom who found the courage this season to tell me what a night watchman found in a single night, and told me to my face, and stood to be broken for it, and would not sign a lie into a book though it cost him his place, and near cost him his freedom. My grandchildren are alive and safe, because a guardsman answered a cry in the dark that his orders told him to ignore. That is not desertion. That is the whole of what an oath is for asterisk." He straightened and his voice rang. "Let it be known through the palace and the realm, Corwin Ashe did not desert his post. He honored it as no other man in my house has done. The order for his arrest is void, struck from every book. And no guard of Harrowgate will ever again be broken for leaving his post to answer a child's cry in the night. I make it law this hour." I could not speak. I am not ashamed to say it. A guardsman is trained to keep his face still through anything, and I kept it still, but it cost me everything I had, and I do not think I entirely succeeded, and I do not much care. That was the king's word to me. The rest the world knows or thinks it does. The queen consort Morwenna was that day stripped of every office in the household, and removed from the palace to her dower estate under guard, to await the king's justice in the matter. And though she was the king's own wife, and there were those who murmured she was dealt with too gently, no soul who had stood in that room and heard her say, "I merely did not intervene," ever again called her innocent. Nurse Halloway, who in the end told the whole of it in exchange for the king's mercy, the letter, the money, the instructions to lock and to starve the lamp and to leave the step, was dismissed the realm forever, but not jailed, for she had been an instrument and not a hand. And the crown prince, who might have crushed her, chose instead to be exactly as merciful as she had been careless with his children, which was a lesson to her worth more than any cell. And Nurse Petra, who had wept when they sent her away, who had never let the lamp go dark, was sought out and found in her village and brought back to the children's wing that same week, and the children ran to her, and she wept again, and this time she stayed. They wanted to make me a captain. I would not have it. I am a post-standing man, and I always will be, and a man ought to know his own true shape and keep to it. But I took the one honor I could not refuse, which the crown prince pressed on me himself. I was made the warden of the children's guard, a post created that day and never existing before, charged with the safe keeping of the young ones of the royal house, Malin and Torin and Bram, and God willing their children after them, with a free hand and a standing order, signed by the king, that read simply, "This man may go where the children's safety requires, at any hour, through any door, past any rule, and answer for it only to the crown prince and to his own honor. No man was ever given a truer trust, and I have kept it, and I will keep it while I breathe." Little Bram's arm mended clean, as I told him it would, and left the soldier's scar he had so wanted, a thin pale line up the outside of his forearm that he shows to any who will look, with the same story every time, how his cat got out that wasn't even out, and he fell down all the steps in the dark, and Corwin came, and Corwin always comes, and that is the important part, he tells them, the part you must not leave out. Corwin always comes. He is right. I always will. And Malin, the little sergeant who stood her lonely watch for 2 months and wept because she thought she had failed it, Malin I sat down with, the day after, and I told her the truest thing I know, guardsman to guardsman, which I will set down here as the last word of it, because it is the thing the whole night was really about. You did not fail your watch, I told her. You fell asleep one night after standing it alone for 60. That is not failure. That is what happens to a sentry who is left with no relief, and the fault is never the sentry's, it is the fault of the ones who left her alone on the wall. You were 9 years old, and you stood a watch that grown men and women who were paid to stand it abandoned. You held that door 2 months by yourself in the dark, and the one night you could not hold it, help came, because that is what a watch is really for, Malin. Not so that no one ever falls, so that when someone does, someone else is coming. You are not alone on the wall anymore. That's what changed last night. From now on, when you sleep, I am awake. From now on, someone always comes. She thought about that a long time in the grave way she has, and then she nodded once, the way one soldier nods to another, and I nodded back, and we understood each other, and I believe we always will. People ask me sometimes whether I truly meant to throw away my post and my freedom that night, whether I waited out and chose the child over the rule with my eyes open. I tell them the truth, which is smaller and stranger than the legend of it. I did not weigh anything. I heard a cry in the dark, and I went. Everything after, the step, the scheme, the king's word, the law he made, all of it grew from that one small unweighed thing, a man going toward a child crying in the dark because he could not do otherwise and be a man. If there is a lesson in it worth the telling, it is only this. Keep your post, always keep it faithfully, keep it though your feet ache and the night is long and nothing ever happens. But know in your bones, know it before the night ever comes, that there is one thing and one thing only for which you leave it without a heartbeat's pause, and that thing is the cry of a child in the dark. Everything else is the book. That is the oath beneath the oath. That is the post beneath the post. And a man who has understood it will never, whatever it costs him, stand still while a child bleeds alone at midnight, waiting for someone to come. I always come. That is the whole of it. That is the end of it. And I would do every part of it again.